Alright, here's how I made a decal, if you want to call it that, for my kayak. I started out by cleaning the area where the decal is going to go with some dish soap and the scouring side of a sponge just to really get in there, clean out all those pores, make sure there's no dirt in there. Then I rinsed off that soapy water, dried it off as best I could, and then I let the kayak sit in the sun for 20 minutes just to bake off any moisture that I couldn't get with the towel. Next, we're going to tape up the area where our logo will go. You can see here I'm putting the word Carp Slayer up on the bow. I chose this area, one, because it was going to be out of the water for sure whenever I'm in the kayak, and two, it was already pretty clean. You can see below that there's scuff marks and dirt. I wouldn't put it there, one, because it's below the water line, and two, it's just going to get scratched up when I drive into bushes and brush and stuff like that. So just be cognizant of where you're putting your logo and be smart. When you're putting your tape on, I overlapped each piece about a third to a half of the way. Take your time, make it good and flat and straight. It'll pay off in the long run. Now, my logo was too big for one piece of paper, so I split it up into two, and that's fine. That's just what you have to do with longer logos. But whenever you're connecting them, you have to have the perfectionist mindset, because if this is going to be on your kayak for a long time, you want it to be good. So I lined up carp just kind of as best I could, kind of level with the kayak. And then I did my best to line up Slayer with carp. I messed up the first time. I ripped it off and nailed it on the second try, so don't be afraid to start over. And I don't know if you can notice it here, but I definitely could. Slayer was bent slightly downwards, and I didn't want that, so I restarted. And whenever you're taping your logo on your kayak, make sure the paper is good and taut. Make sure it's super tight, because if there's any slack in there, it'll fold when you're cutting it, and that'll deform your logo and overall just be annoying to cut out. Then you'll cut out your logo or your letters. In my case, I used a utility knife, just loose. I wish I had one of those X-Acto knives with the pen handles on it. Those would have been real convenient, but I just used what I had. It worked out fine. Take your time and do a good job. Don't gouge into your kayak, especially if you have a cheaper one with thin walls. This is a quality kayak, so I wasn't worried about that at all. But just go through there, make sure you're cutting through all the tape, but don't go overboard. Also, if you're cutting out intricate logos or decals that have interior designs or interior holes, like for example an A, cut out the inside first. Cut out the inside of the logo or the inside of the letter, because if you cut the outside out first, it's just going to fall off. You can see here I'm starting with the inside of the A, then I'll work my way on the outside. I also found that getting the really tight curves done first, it was annoying, but that's what worked for me. Cutting the gradual curves and the straights, those are easy, so get all the little tiny annoying cuts done first. Like I said, that's what worked for me. And now it's time to peel off those letters to expose the plastic underneath, which will spray paint. Don't be afraid to go back in there with your knife and recut stuff out. You don't want any loose fibers in there or any slop in the tape. Just make sure they're good, crisp, clean letters. And I'm also using the corner of my knife just to get the letter started, because it's almost impossible to do it with just a fingernail. And we're about halfway done now. Don't be afraid to throw on a podcast or something. I've said this once, I'll say it probably 2 more times during this video. Take your time, because the more time you invest in this, probably the better it'll look. Cover up the parts of the kayak that you don't want spray paint on. As you can see here, I didn't go overboard. I covered roughly 6 to 8 inches away from the logo, because I figured I have decent aim. I used the best quality spray paint that I was willing to buy from Lowe's. It looked pretty promising. It said 5 times bonding, or I don't know, something like that. do good light coats. I went with 2 coats here. I did 3 coats on the other side of my kayak, and it turned out all right. But I think 2 coats is a happy medium. 3 coats, it's kind of a build up, and I think it'd be easy to get scratched off. 2 coats, it's a good solid coat. You won't see green beneath it, and also there's not a whole lot of a build up of paint. And this is the last step, kind of the last step. Don't ruin it. Take your time. Now, I found that pulling the tape away, like perpendicular to the letters or to the logo, works best. Pulling it or ripping it alongside the letter tends to pull some of the paint off, and you have some tear out, if you want to call it that. I had some tear out on this first C, and then I figured out that like pulling the tape away perpendicular to the letter decal, that seemed to decrease the amount of tear out that I had with the paint. Don't be afraid to go in there and separate the paint from the tape with your knife if you want to be extra careful. And yeah, also let your paint sit overnight. I didn't ruin another decal, but there was a lot of tear out because I was impatient, and I tried to pull the tape off after like an hour or two. So take your time. Don't ruin it. If you spent a whole lot of time on it beforehand, don't ruin it by being impatient. So let it dry. Yeah, be careful. And do as good of a job as you can. Now, I wasn't happy with some of that tear out, so I sprayed some spray paint in the bottom of a soda can, and I went back in there with a paintbrush, just barely kissing the edges. Not doing a whole lot of work here, just trying to get them a little bit more crisp. Now, one thing that I ran into, I call it fading, basically where the tape lifts up a little and the spray paint gets behind it. You just get a little bit of a fade in there. I went in there and scratched it off with my knife. Looks rough up close, but it looks fine from a distance. So, thanks for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments.